To Senator Warner, Deputy Secretary Poneman, senators, delegates, panelists, and guests. My name is William Harvey, and I'm president of Hampton University, and I've had the real honor to be president for 31 years. So I greet you today as really one of the old timers, and I say to you, good morning. On behalf of our faculty, staff, and students, it really is with great pleasure that I welcome you to Hampton University. We call it our home by the sea because we've got water on three sides, and we think that it's the prettiest campus anywhere in the world. So welcome to our home by the sea. We are really honored to serve as host institution for Senator Warner's Virginia Summit on Energy Opportunities. I applaud Senator Warner's efforts. He, like me, is an entrepreneur, and he has a very strong and successful business background. I believe that one aspect of his success is his recognition that businesses have a responsibility, not only to their customers, but also to their communities. As president of Hampton University, I am proud that our institution takes its role as a corporate citizen seriously. 31 years ago, when I became president, I articulated a new vision for this institution. A large part of that vision was to create a paradigm that would position the university as a strong undergraduate institution conducting world-class research. And for the past several decades, Hampton has worked toward fulfilling that vision. As a result, today, as I speak, our faculty have acquired 12 patents on a breast and prostate cancer detection devices, 14 patents on prosthesis for artificial limbs, launched a $140 million weather satellite from Vandenberg Air Force Base to study the atmosphere, and are seeking to isolate the gene that causes Alzheimer's. The idea is that if we can do that, then physicians can treat that dreaded disease in one's 20s and 30s as opposed to when it manifests itself in 60s, 70s, and 80s. We're also studying diseases and issues related to people of color. I don't know about you, but before we got into this, I really thought that the only difference between black and white and red and brown and tan skin was pigmentation. That's not correct. There are issues and diseases that are indigenous to all of those. We're also building a $225 million proton beam cancer treatment center. There are only 5 in this nation, and ours will be the 6th or the 7th. University of Pennsylvania is building one as well. And when you think about the fact that 1 out of 3 Virginians gets cancer in his or her lifetime, further, if you think about the fact that Hampton Roads leads the nation in prostate cancer deaths, and even further, the fact that black men have a 59% higher incident rate of prostate cancer than do white men, then you can see the need to have this cutting-edge technology fighting that dreaded disease. Of direct interest to those of us here today are our efforts to recognize the importance of the national imperative to develop alternative energy sources that address economic and environmental concerns with the goal of energy independence. I applaud our president, I applaud our Congress for moving boldly into this arena. At the university, we began by establishing a green committee and identifying green initiatives. These have been outlined for you on the handouts that you were supposed to receive upon your entrance. If you do not have it, I'll make sure that you get it. We recognized early on that going green would be a challenge for us, considering that we are operating a heating and cooling system that is as old as the university itself. The university is currently seeking funding for a demonstration project to replace its present fuel system, which emits 50,000 tons of carbon dioxide a year. And what we want to do is to replace that with a total geothermal system. We believe that the geothermal system is the most effective, state-of-the-art, next generation, domestic, low-carbon energy technology. We have also made plans to ensure that all of our newly constructed and renovated facilities are assembled with energy-efficient products. Additionally, Hampton University has established an Energy Institute to provide leadership in the development of practical energy production, storage, and distribution strategies. These projects will reduce harmful emissions, consume less fuel, and serve as a role model for other institutions to emulate our efforts. Now, having said that, let me say that I am most appreciative to Senator Warner for his leadership and support in the development of alternative energy sources. In the vernacular of the kids, he gets it. He gets it, and his foresight has brought us here today. Mark Warner was elected to the United States Senate in November of 2008 and serves on the Senate's Banking, Budget, Commerce, and Rules Committee. He served as governor of Virginia from 2002 to 2006, after spending 20 years as a business leader in the high-tech industry. Senator Warner was a first member of his family to graduate from college, earning a degree from George Washington, thanks to a part-time job and student loans. He also received a law degree from Harvard, my alma mater, in 1980. I was a little ahead of him. I got my doctorate there in 1972. So I was a little bit ahead of him, but Secretary Potterman as well, because I think he told me he lived in Winthrop House, and I was one of the tutors in Adams House. And there's some real stories about Adams House that I probably can't tell right here. But as a private citizen and philanthropist, Senator Warner helped create the Virginia Healthcare Foundation, which has provided health care to more than 600,000 underserved Virginians, and SeniorNavigator.com, a referral network for older Virginians and their caregivers. As governor of Virginia, Mark Warner inherited budget shortfalls that ultimately grew to some $6 billion. He left office 4 years later with a budget surplus that allowed Virginia to make the largest single investment in K through 12 education in state history. Key reinvestments in one of the nation's best public university system, and record investments in the cleanup of the Chesapeake Bay. In 2004, Senator Warner chaired the National Governors Association, and Time magazine named him one of America's 5 best governors. Governor Warner's bipartisan, results-oriented focus resulted in Virginia being designated as the nation's best managed state and its best state for business. I've known Senator Warner for a long time. He has been very supportive of our efforts here with our Proton Beam Cancer Treatment Center, with other forms of educational initiatives, and being really a very forward-looking, constructive public official. He lives with his wife, Lisa, and 3 daughters in Alexandria, Virginia. Please join me in welcoming your friend and my friend, a friend of Hampton University, a friend of energy alternative sources, Senator Mark Warner. Please come forward.
Thank you, Dr. Harvey, for that very generous introduction. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to once again come across this wonderful historic campus and have this very important session. I want to welcome all of you. I know Dr. Harvey indicated a greetings to business leaders. I know we've got the Mayor of Hampton, Molly Ward, here. I know we've got state officials. Senator Frank Wagner is here. Former Congresswoman Thelma Drake is here. There may be other elected officials. If I have not called you out, blame it on my staff. I also want to say a special word about Bill Harvey. There is no one that is more passionate about his institution, more relentless in his drive for excellence, and more committed to getting things done than Bill Harvey. You know, governors come and go, senators come and go, congresspeople come and go, college presidents stay forever. And Bill Harvey, not all college presidents, but his 31 years at this institution, mostly through force of personality as much as anything else, through enormously changing times, he has always maintained Hampton's striving for excellence, his commitment to building this university into a top-flight research university. He is polite and generous up here, but I don't know, Eleanor, you know, how many of y'all have been in a meeting with Bill Harvey when he's after something? You know, he made comment about the proton cancer device. I'm proud to support that, but you do not say no to Bill Harvey. And just so that you know, Dr. Harvey, once again, this was my letter to Dr. Chu supporting the reconstruction of the energy facility to make sure that we actually make this. And if we get this done, Secretary Poneman, this would be one of the first universities in America that would convert from a plant and a facility that was built back, I believe, 1868, was it not? To a full geothermal-based power generation. And we're only looking for a small $35 million investment, Dan. And in classic Dr. Harvey methodology, it was, I think, 4 minutes into the conversation with Secretary Poneman before he brought out the whole brochure on this appeal. And Dan, let me indicate to you that this will not be your last message you've heard from Dr. Harvey. So thank you again, Bill, for hosting us here today. And again, thank all of you, and I want to thank officials from Hampton, and I want to also thank my staff. I am fairly relentless on also hopefully striving for excellence and striving for successful events, and we did this in relatively short notice, and the fact that we've got close to 500 people here today, I think reflects not only an interest in this very, very important subject, but also a lot of hard work that went into bringing you all here today on a Friday morning in the middle of summer. Why are we doing this? Dr. Harvey made mention of the fact that my tenure as governor, and I've about run out of this story, but I'll tell it one more time. A number of you, as we were upstairs, were grabbing me and saying, well, you know, how do you like the transition from being governor to senator? My politically correct answer is it's interesting. There are parts of it that I find a little bit hard getting used to. You know, Bill gave a very generous introduction to me then as senator, but if he had introduced me as governor, so as some of you may recall, I would have been introduced, Frank, as you know, or Bill Shelton knows, I would have been formally introduced as His Excellency, the Governor of the Commonwealth, Mark Warner. And as you know, by tradition, you all got to stand up. You know, the new way I'm introduced, and Bill gave it much more generous than most, the way I'm introduced mostly is, we now bring forward Mark Warner, Jr., Senator from Virginia, number 91. But it is an extraordinarily challenging and interesting time to be in to be in Washington. We face enormous challenges. I am still striving to be that bipartisan radical centrist that I said in my job application process for this job. It is hard to do in Washington, particularly at this point when our country faces so many challenges, yet too many folks seem to view it more as team sports, Democrat versus Republican, as opposed to putting our country's interest first. And this issue around energy is one of the reasons where there is no Democratic or Republican solution. There's only going to be an American solution. And I believe that it is that this is an issue that we absolutely have to confront, no matter where we fall along the political spectrum or whatever motivated you to get here. I want to tell you really 5 reasons why when we were sitting down, and I'm going to come to introducing, my job is to introduce Secretary Poneman, but in a couple moments, but 5 reasons why we wanted to hold this summit, where we are bringing together federal officials who have a lot of the resources that we will be hopefully getting access to, and I think Secretary Poneman is going to make a positive announcement today about some of those resources. But we also need state officials, because a lot of this is going to run, a lot of the at least governmental programs will run through the state. But echoing what Dr. Harvey said, if we're going to get this right, we've got to involve local electeds and entrepreneurs. Some of you know my background was I managed to eke out a living in cell phones before I got into government. And for the last 20-odd years, until a few years ago, if I was speaking to a business school class or a college class, I would advocate that the space to be is telecom or information technology. If I'm going to make that same presentation in 2009, I would argue that there will be more jobs and more wealth created over the next 25 years in the energy sector than any other sector in the world. And right now, America is not positioned to take advantage of that opportunity. If you look back simply over the last decade, where America had, and Dan may correct me on this a little later, but last 10 to 15 years, America had 8 out of 10, I believe, of the top wind companies, solar companies, renewable energy companies. If you look at those numbers today, they're the actual inverse. Most of the other countries in the world, who would have ever assumed that Germany would be a leading solar power? Not exactly the place you think to go for the sun. Spain in wind, France in nuclear. We've got I don't think any of us are smart enough to figure out what that silver bullet's going to be, but we are losing our competitive advantage in terms of what I think will be the next great job and wealth creator for our country and for the world. And more than any single other factor, making sure that America doesn't lose its innovation, technological, and entrepreneurial lead in this field. First reason why we've got to do this summit today and have this kind of exchange. Second reason is that I also feel that it is, and I know we've got members of our armed services here, and I thank you for being here as well, that changing our energy mix is a national security threat. It is remarkable to me, with all of the enormous costs of our nation's defense, that we still spend $500 to $600 billion, even at current prices and higher, when prices were higher in terms of oil, buying oil from countries that are almost uniformly around the world anti-American. Why we do that? Because of our dependence upon fossil fuels, more directly because oil, more of those sources, and I know Frank will speak about opportunities we've got here domestically, but long term, that could be perhaps part of the mix, but long term, the challenge is going to be get ourselves off some of this foreign oil mix. Not only does that save us in terms of outflow of capital, but it also relieves some of the burden on our armed services and protecting some of those shipping lanes. Third reason we need to have this summit, and there may be some in the audience who will not concur with this, but I absolutely believe the science is overwhelming. We have to take on the very real challenge of climate change and carbon emissions. And this is an issue that is not only environmentally necessary for us to take on in a thoughtful way that doesn't put our nation at a competitive disadvantage, but take on a thoughtful way. But this is clearly the direction where the rest of the industrial world is headed, and I think Congress is wrestling with how to get that right. The fourth reason we are doing this summit is that because one of the activities that the Congress and the President has taken on over the last 6 months in this very, very busy time has been our effort to try to kickstart our economy in the Recovery Act, or what's more commonly known as the stimulus program. I sometimes think the stimulus program was not very well explained. About 40% of the stimulus was actually tax cuts that go to small businesses, and most every one of us in this room. 30% of the funds actually go, as Frank knows, to the states to kind of shore up areas that where otherwise there would have been much greater state cuts. But about 30% of the stimulus dollars, which are dollars for the most part that haven't been distributed, are in areas that, again, regardless of our partisan affiliation, I think would be areas of critical long-term investment. Broadband, healthcare information technology, high-speed rail, and energy being one of the other areas. We recently held up in Richmond, for example, a healthcare IT conference where we brought down, again, folks from the administration to talk about those opportunities. And with the fact that so many of the dollars potentially coming out of the stimulus program, and actually programs that were initiated under President Bush that haven't been distributed yet in terms of loan programs, we've got to make sure that Virginia is well poised to take advantage of these funding sources. Some of these funding sources will come in the form, and again, Secretary Poneman will speak to this, in the form of loan programs if you've got an emerging business. Some of these will come in terms of how we work with localities on overall energy plans. But a lot of these dollars are going to come that can have an immediate effect on energy conservation. I mean, some of the ways that we can be the most effective and the lowest hanging fruit is energy conservation. A piece of that will, for example, be weatherization programs. And again, I think Secretary Poneman will speak to this issue, where we can not only put people back to work short term in terms of weatherizing homes and buildings, but this is an investment that has an immediately short-term payback, because particularly if we are weatherizing low-income homes that we otherwise support through programs that Bill Shelton and others implement called LIHEAP and others, a little bit of money on the front end will save us public dollars over the long run, as well as decrease our energy consumption and, candidly, help folks who are in financial extremis. We've got great opportunities. I know I saw Mary Doswell here a little bit earlier from Dominion. Some of the best, again, immediate short-term opportunities are going to come in what's called smart grid technology. How do we make sure that we don't lose so much power that's already generated by Dominion, AEP, and other power generation sources along our power lines? How do we, just as we had to upgrade our telecommunication systems 20 years ago, we've not gone through that similar kind of upgrade with our electrical grid. How do we make sure we do what already is becoming common practice in the UK of putting in smart metering devices at your homes and businesses? All areas where it's kind of the ultimate win-win situation, where we can save money, create American businesses, decrease our dependence upon foreign oil, and take on the question of climate change. This is an area where there ought to be that easy common ground. So the fourth very important and kind of stimulating effort for this summit today was to make sure, Secretary Poneman, that Virginia gets its fair share. That's an applause line. Virginia gets its fair share of what is coming down the pike. A matter of fact, that there has been, I know the Obama administration has talked just in weatherization alone about trying to weatherize 2 million homes, upgrading 75% of our federal buildings, and creating nearly 500,000 new green jobs. Candidly, I think that may be actually on the low side. And again, I see Brett and others, we've got to do this in a way that doesn't destroy our manufacturing base. Let me be the first to acknowledge that. I think, this is where we're going to need the kind of creativity that Virginia has been so famous for around IT, around healthcare, around our partnership with our brave men and women in our defense forces. This from a Virginia-centric business plan ought to be where we put a stake and claim national and world leadership around this issue of getting the new energy future right. And that brings us finally to the final reason of why this summit. If we're going to get it right, we need the financial resources. We need our partners in government, because a lot of these early stage programs, perhaps more than say telecom or IT was, a lot of the early stage programs are going to require partnership with government at the local, state, and federal level. And we're going to need you who are in the entrepreneurial space. We're going to need you within the existing Virginia businesses to think, view these changes not as a threat, but actually as an opportunity. And that's going to require kind of putting together not just this summit today, but panels like this on an ongoing basis to drive this opportunity. I mean, if you would have thought 20 years ago, would Virginia have become the internet capital of the world in many ways, no one would have predicted that. But we had a series of fortuitous activities that took place in the late 80s and through about the mid-90s that made that happen. We ought to today claim the opportunity or claim the challenge of saying, when people think about the new energy economy, that they not think about the Silicon Valley or not think about Route 128 around Boston or not think about some other area, but that we think about it all across Virginia, starting here in Hampton Roads up through Northern Virginia, Richmond, and making sure as well that we don't forget the rural parts of our state, because they have an incredibly important role to play as well. So I am very proud that we were able to assemble this group, serve as the coordination entity for this kind of opportunity. This cannot be a one-shot activity. Getting this right is going to take ongoing sessions. Getting this right is going to take collaboration on the breaks. I found through years of my tenure in business, that the speakers were great, but the deals are made out in the hallway or on the way to the bathroom or over the coffee pot. Don't just talk to the people you came with here. Make sure you spend some time networking, because this is a brand new industry that we ought to be birthing, and we ought to take the leadership role. So I thank you for coming, and I now want to move to my actual formal job today, which is to introduce our first major speaker, our Deputy Secretary of Energy. Deputy Secretary of Energy Dan Poneman is a good friend. One of the reasons I was able to get him here today is our kids went to preschool and early grades of school together, and we've both got some stories on each other that go back long enough that when I asked, he couldn't refuse. Kind of a Bill Harvey approach to getting someone here today. Matter of fact, one of my great honors is in my first 6 months as senator was to introduce Dan to when he was nominated by the president, and you then have to come before your confirmation hearing before the Energy Committee, and I had the opportunity to introduce Dan to the committee, although candidly Dan is very well known in Washington. He's had a distinguished career of public service. He's served on the National Security Council. He's got a great deal of expertise around energy issues, biological issues on the international front. He served on the National Security Council under both President Bush 41 and President Clinton. He brings that same kind of bipartisan focus on results that is, I think, absolutely necessary for all policies, but particularly energy policy in today's challenging times. He left government, he retired the first time, I think, from government back in the late 90s and practiced law at Hogan and Hartson, and then worked with Brent Scowcroft. He served on a number of federal commissions, advisory panels, authored books on nuclear policy. He's received in the 2005 Douglas Dillon Award for Distinguished Writing in American Diplomacy. He brings to this job, working with Secretary Chu, this is the guy, he may not say this, but I'm just introducing, I can say it. This is the guy that actually runs the department day to day. This is, it is, I have enormous respect for Secretary Chu and stuff, but when we need something done, when you need something done, I'm going to really put you in trouble, at the Department of Energy, this is the guy you need to see. And I think over the years, the Department of Energy has not been known as the most robust federal agency in terms of getting resources out and acting expeditiously. I think Dan's challenge and opportunity is going to get that right, because not just out of the stimulus package, but out of actions that were taken under President Bush, there's a lot of resources, there's a lot of new programmatic responsibility placed on the Department of Energy. In many ways, there is no federal cabinet agency that I think will be more important over the next decade in terms of getting it right for our national security, for our job creation opportunities, and for taking on the very critical issues of climate change than the Department of Energy. And I think President Obama chose wisely in choosing Dan as our Deputy Secretary. And let me present to you this Virginia, Hampton Roads, and Hampton University crowd, my friend, Deputy Secretary Dan Poneman.